The HOA president stood on my grandmother's porch, clutching a stack of eviction papers as if they were a winning lottery ticket. She didn't knock, just stood there, tapping her perfectly polished shoe against the old cedar floorboards, the sound echoing through the quiet morning like a countdown. Her smile was the kind people wear when they're sure they've already won. "You have 72 hours to vacate the property," she said, her tone sweetened with fake concern. I didn't say a word. I just stared past her, over her shoulder to the lake that shimmered behind her BMW. The same lake my grandmother used to call our family's mirror. It looked calm, peaceful, and endless. And what this woman didn't know was that the water she was staring at wasn't just a view. It was mine, every inch of it. I'm Ezra, and this was the morning the HOA tried to erase my family's history. I thought I was about to lose everything my grandmother built, but that smug smile on the porch turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. Because the moment she handed me those papers, she made a mistake she could never undo. The cabin had been in our family since the 1960s, built by my grandfather and finished by my grandmother. Opal. She called it her worthless swampland whenever anyone asked why she didn't sell it. I never understood the joke back then. I just thought it was her humble way of describing a place that meant everything to us. After my divorce and the implosion of my corporate job, I came back here looking for silence. The cabin gave me that. Each morning, mist drifted off the lake like a slow exhale, and the cries of loons echoed through the pines. I'd sit on the weathered dock with a mug of coffee, thinking that maybe life was simple again, that peace lasted about 6 months, right until a developer built 47 identical luxury homes around the lake. They called the project Lakeshore Estates. It looked like someone copy-pasted the same house 47 times and painted them beige to match their personalities. Most of the new residents were polite enough, retirees chasing quiet, young families wanting clean air, but every paradise breeds its own tyrant. Ours arrived in a spotless BMW, hair perfect, clipboard ready. Her name was Brina Caldwell, and she decided within a week that my rustic cabin was a problem. At first it was small things, notes about community standards, suggestions that I modernize my siding, letters about unauthorized colors on my window frames. I ignored them. Then the letters turned into official notices from a group calling itself the Lakeshore Homeowners Association. The HOA had been her idea. She gathered signatures from every homeowner in the development and somehow convinced the county clerk to certify it. The moment she got that title, president, she changed. Her friendly smiles became lectures about preserving property, values. She started holding community inspections, walking up and down driveways with her clipboard like a drill. Sergeant inspecting troops. One day she fined an elderly couple $300 because their mailbox didn't match the uniform color. Scheme. Another day she demanded that a Vietnam veteran take down his flagpole because it disrupted the visual harmony. The sound of her heels clicking down the pavement became the neighborhood's alarm bell. For a while I was safe. My cabin sat slightly outside the main loop of homes, half hidden by trees. But when she ran out of easy targets, she set her sights on me. One afternoon I came home to find a bright orange envelope pinned to my door. Inside was a formal violation notice listing everything she thought was wrong with my property. Unapproved structure design, improper siding material, non-compliant exterior paint, and general aesthetic discordance. I laughed at first. The cabin was built decades before her HOA even existed. But then came the invoices, monthly community fees, fines for non-participation, and threats of legal action if I didn't comply. I tossed them into the fireplace. The next step was nastier. She started spreading rumors that I was unstable, that my divorce was due to anger issues, that I'd been seen yelling at contractors. I hadn't, but in a small neighborhood, gossip travels faster than truth. The friendly waves I used to get turned into polite nods. Some neighbors stopped looking me in the eye at all. When the certified eviction papers came, I almost laughed again. But the document looked official, full of legal language about removing unauthorized residents and violations of community codes. For a second, I felt a flicker of panic. Then I remembered something my uncle, a retired real estate lawyer, used to say: bullies love paperwork until someone actually reads it. I spent that evening at the kitchen table, surrounded by my grandmother's old files. She'd kept everything, every tax receipt, every survey, every scrap of correspondence. Her handwriting filled the margins of old deeds like little breadcrumbs. One note caught my eye: check water rights before any sale. I didn't know what it meant, but it felt important. The next morning I drove to the county records office. The clerk, an older woman with glasses hanging on a chain, recognized my grandmother's name. Opal's cabin? She was sharp, the woman said, leading me to a stack of dusty ledgers. We spent hours flipping through maps and deeds until one yellow document made her whistle softly. Well, this is interesting, she said. Your parcel includes riparian rights dating back to 1891. That means you own part of the lake itself. And look here, an old survey line that extends beyond the current tax map. About 200 feet east, I blinked. 200 feet east was where the community parking lot sat, the one every resident used, including Brainer's precious BMW. I made copies of everything and left the building feeling a strange mix of disbelief and adrenaline. On the way home, I called my uncle. He asked me to bring the documents to his office. When I spread them across his desk, he let out a low whistle. Ezra, he said, tapping a finger on the survey map, if this is accurate, you own the only legal access point to that entire development. That realization hit like thunder. Brina had been threatening to evict me from property she'd been trespassing on daily. My panic turned into a steady, quiet satisfaction. We agreed on the next step: verify the old boundaries with a modern survey. My uncle recommended a local expert, Dylan, whose father had drawn the original maps decades ago. Dylan showed up with GPS equipment that looked like something NASA left behind. After 3 hours of scanning, he confirmed what the records said. My land extended into the parking area and part of the lake shore. When I told him what the HOA had done, he grinned. Well, he said, looks like their cars are sitting on your front lawn and their docks are floating on your water. That night, I stood on the porch, looking out at the glittering lake and the neatly lined cars across the gravel lot. Each one sat squarely inside my boundary line. My grandmother's voice echoed in my mind. Worthless swampland, my foot. The next few days felt like living 2 lives. In one, Brina kept sending letters, threatening legal action and promising to protect community integrity. In the other, I was building my own case, copying deeds, taking photos, recording every trespass. My uncle advised patience. Don't tip your hand, he said. Let her think she's winning. I watched from the window as she walked door to door, collecting signatures for emergency legal measures. Her tone oozed concern as she warned residents about the unstable man at the old cabin. Some people believed her. Others just nodded to make her leave. Meanwhile, I dug deeper into my grandmother's records. Hidden in a cedar chest beneath old quilts was a rolled-up parchment, the original 1962 property survey, hand-drawn and stamped. It matched Dylan's data perfectly. The boundary line didn't just include the parking lot. It also extended under part of the lake itself. That meant every boat slip the HOA rented out sat on my property. The next morning, I visited the state water management office to confirm. The clerk there explained that our lake had never been transferred to public ownership. Because of those riparian rights, the original homestead, my grandmother's, still held ownership of the lake bed. I walked out shaking, half in disbelief, half in awe. They had tried to evict me from the one piece of land that literally made their neighborhood valuable. For the next week, I prepared quietly. I hired Dylan to mark visible boundary flags around the parking lot and shoreline. He used bright orange markers that couldn't be ignored. I documented everything: license plates, dates, photos of the cars sitting on my land. My uncle drafted letters we'd deliver later, once the timing was right. Brina, of course, didn't slow down. She posted a notice for a mandatory community meeting to address the cabin situation. It was scheduled for Friday night at the community center. I could already imagine her standing there, basking in the attention, ready to rally her followers. What she didn't know was that her big night would become her undoing. By Thursday, my team was ready. My uncle, Dylan, and a few neighbors who'd grown tired of her antics. We printed copies of the deed, the surveys, and photos of every car parked on my land. We also gathered proof from Garrett, a quiet neighbor who'd been tracking HOA finances. He discovered that Brainer had been pocketing part of the community fees for administrative expenses. That evening, as the sun set over my lake, I looked out across the water and felt something I hadn't felt in months, peace mixed with anticipation. Tomorrow, the woman who thought she owned the community would learn that her empire was built on my ground. I went to bed smiling, hearing the soft lap of waves against the dock. The same sound my grandmother once called the heartbeat of home. She'd been right all along. You don't need to fight bullies with anger. You just let them walk far enough into your land before you show them where the line really is. The next morning, the air was heavy with the kind of calm that comes before a storm. I brewed coffee and stood on the porch, watching mist lift off the lake. From here, I could see the row of cars gleaming across the gravel lot. Every one of them sat on my land, though no one in the neighborhood knew it yet. The orange boundary flags Dylan had planted fluttered lightly in the breeze, little warnings no one had bothered to read. By noon, flyers appeared in everyone's mailbox. Emergency HOA meeting, they announced in bold letters. Topic: ongoing community threat. Brainer's signature sprawled across the bottom like an autograph. The tone left no doubt. Tonight was supposed to be my public execution. I called my uncle. They're holding it tonight, I said. Good, he replied. Let her build the stage. We'll bring the lights. We spent the afternoon rehearsing what would happen. I'd open calmly, show no anger. Dylan would project the updated survey on the wall for everyone to see. My uncle would explain the legal side in simple language. No threats, no revenge, just the truth. We'd let her fall into her own trap. As evening settled, I loaded the documents into my truck and drove toward the community center. The parking lot was full, of course it was, and every car's tire sat squarely inside my boundary. I parked at the far edge and walked in. Through the glass doors, I could already hear her voice, smooth, confident, dripping with superiority. Inside, folding chairs lined the room, filled with homeowners clutching coffee cups and whispers. At the front stood a projector screen, a laptop, and Brainer in a navy blazer that screamed authority. Beside her sat a man in an ill-fitting suit, her lawyer, I guessed. The sheriff leaned against the back wall, arms crossed, the kind of man who'd seen enough neighborhood drama to last a lifetime. Brainer spotted me and smiled that thin, polite smile predators give before pouncing. Mr. Thompson, she said brightly, so glad you decided to attend. This meeting concerns your situation. Wouldn't miss it, I replied, taking a seat in the back. My uncle sat beside me, calm and unreadable. Dylan unpacked his tablet quietly. The lights dimmed, and Brainer launched into her presentation. Slide after slide appeared, photos of my cabin taken from unflattering angles, close-ups of peeling paint, captions like non-compliant exterior and safety risk. Her voice carried the rhythm of someone used to applause. We must act decisively, she said. One person's negligence can reduce everyone's property value. We propose daily fines and, if necessary, legal eviction. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some nodded. Others looked uncomfortable. The sheriff's expression never changed. When she finished, she clasped her hands together. Before we vote, she said, Mr. Thompson, would you like to respond? I stood, the room quieted. Thank you, Mrs. Caldwell, I said evenly. I do have something to share before anyone makes a decision. Dylan stepped forward and connected his tablet to the projector. The screen flickered, then displayed a crisp aerial map of the neighborhood, colored lines outlining every property. These, I said, are the verified county survey results updated last week. A faint hum filled the room. Dylan zoomed in on the area around the lake. According to official records, I continued, my property extends approximately 247 feet beyond what modern maps show. That includes this section here. I pointed to the bright rectangle labeled community parking. Gasps spread through the chairs. Someone whispered, "That can't be right." Brina's smile faltered. "That parking area is community property," she snapped. My uncle spoke for the first time. "Actually, no. Maintenance doesn't equal ownership. Legally, it's private land. Mr. Thompson's family has held title since 1962. The HOA has been using it without permission." The sheriff leaned forward slightly, studying the map. "And there's more," I said. Dylan zoomed out, tracing the shoreline. "These lines mark the lakebed boundaries attached to my deed. They predate your HOA by nearly half a century." For a moment, silence. Then the whispering started again, nervous, confused. Someone asked, "Does that mean the docks?" "Yes," I said. "Every dock, every rented boat, slip the HOA's been charging fees for sits on my property." The lawyer fidgeted with his tie. Brina's face went pale, then red. "That's ridiculous," she said sharply. "We've managed this community for years. If you think you can—" "I don't think," I interrupted softly. "I know, and I have the documentation to prove it." My uncle laid the copies on a nearby table. The sheriff walked over and flipped through them, lips moving silently as he read. When he looked up, his tone was calm but firm. "These appear legitimate, Mrs. Caldwell. You might want to speak to your own attorney before making further claims." The room erupted in overlapping voices, shock, disbelief, a few delighted laughs. Brina tried to regain control, tapping her clipboard against the table. "Everyone, please, let's stay focused. This man is trying to confuse you with paperwork. The issue is compliance." "Actually," I said, "the issue is trespassing. For 3 years, every car parked in that lot has been sitting on my private land, including yours." That line landed like thunder. She froze, words catching in her throat. I let the silence hang just long enough before continuing. "I'm not here to start a war. I'm here to end one. You all deserve clarity and fairness. So here's what I propose." I explained the plan my uncle and I had drafted. Residents could lease parking and lake access at a nominal rate, less than they'd ever paid the HOA. The money would go into a community fund for maintenance and environmental projects. No fines, no threats, no fake authority. People started nodding. Relief softened faces that had been tight with tension for months. Even the ones who'd avoided me looked up, realizing this wasn't vengeance. It was sanity. Brina tried one last defense. "You can't just replace the HOA. It's legally recognized." My uncle smiled faintly. "Only for properties that consented to join. Mr. Thompson's land never did, which means your authority ends at his fence line." The sheriff cleared his throat. "I'd say this matter calls for some new discussions rather than fines." That was it. The balance of power shifted in that instant. The woman who had strutted across my porch with eviction papers now stood speechless in front of 50 witnesses. Her lawyer quietly closed his briefcase, muttering something about needing to review contracts. I could have stopped there, but something in me wanted closure. Not revenge, just truth. "Before I leave," I said, "there's one more thing everyone should see." I played a short video clip from one of my security cameras. It showed Brina walking across my driveway, stepping over Dylan's bright orange boundary markers to take the photos she'd used in her slideshow. The timestamp glowed clearly on the screen. Murmurs turned into laughter, then disbelief. The sheriff scribbled a note. "That's trespassing," he said quietly. Brina's face drained of color. "This meeting is over," she snapped, gathering her papers. But no one moved. Sandra, one of the quieter neighbors, spoke up. "No, it's not. We need to vote." Hands rose across the room, every single one except Brina's. The motion passed to dissolve the HOA and form a new association based on voluntary participation. When the meeting ended, people came to me one by one, shaking my hand, apologizing for believing rumors. Sandra smiled. "Guess your grandma's worthless swampland wasn't so worthless after all." Outside, the air was cool. The sky mirrored in the calm lake. I walked past the row of cars still parked on my property. Brina's BMW gleamed under the streetlight, perfectly polished, perfectly out of place. I considered leaving a note under her wiper, "Please remove your vehicle from my land," but decided the boundary flag said enough. That night I sat on the dock, listening to the frogs and distant laughter from neighbors celebrating freedom they hadn't realized they'd lost. For the first time since inheriting the cabin, I felt completely at home. The next morning, I started drafting plans for the new community fund. Part of the revenue from parking and lake leases would go toward repairing the old dock, cleaning the shoreline, and setting up scholarships in my grandmother's name. People who'd once avoided me began stopping by, offering to help. Chuck, the veteran, volunteered to build benches near the beach. The Kowalskis repainted their shed in colors they actually liked, instead of the mandatory beige Brainer had demanded. A week later, a moving truck appeared in front of Brainer's house. She didn't wave when she drove away. No one went out to say goodbye. By the end of the month, the neighborhood looked different. Without constant fines and inspections, people relaxed. Yards still looked neat, but now they reflected personality. Flowers, kids' toys, a little chaos that made the place feel alive. The lake sparkled under clearer water after we organized the first clean-up day. Sometimes I'd catch myself laughing at how close I'd come to giving up before discovering the truth buried in those old files. My grandmother had left me more than property. She'd left me a puzzle and the tools to solve it. One evening I invited everyone for a cookout by the water. We grilled burgers, told stories, and watched the sun sink behind the pines. As the sky turned gold, I looked around at the faces of my neighbors, no longer adversaries. Just people sharing the same patch of earth, and felt something close to gratitude. My uncle clinked his glass against mine. "To Opal," he said, "and to doing your homework." "To Opal," I echoed. When darkness fell, lanterns reflected off the water in a scattered trail of light. Somewhere out there, I imagined my grandmother smiling at the sight. The cabin, once threatened with eviction, now stood at the center of a thriving community built on respect rather than rules. And whenever I walked past the orange boundary markers, still standing at the edge of the lot, I'd remember that afternoon on the porch when a stranger tried to claim my home. She thought she was serving an eviction notice. Turns out she was just delivering proof of how much we owned. Brina's BMW was gone, but traces of her empire lingered. Faded HOA signs still hung crooked on mailboxes, the kind that once carried warnings and fines. Each week another one disappeared, either quietly removed or turned into firewood. The silence she left behind felt different, lighter, cleaner, like the air after a long storm. The sheriff closed his investigation with a simple note: "No further action required." My uncle had offered to press charges for trespass and fraud, but I refused. Let her think she'd escaped. She would soon learn that the real punishment wasn't prison. It was watching everything she'd built collapse without her. Within a month, Lakeshore Estates became something new. We renamed it Lakeshore Community, dropping the word estates because no one wanted to sound like property owned by someone else. I handled the paperwork that dissolved the HOA charter. Brenner's name vanished from county records, erased as neatly as if she'd never existed. Meanwhile, I filed a quiet claim for back compensation for unauthorized commercial use of my land and water. The lawyer for the former HOA tried to argue, but the math was simple. 3 years of parking fees, boat slip rentals, and access charges added up to a number large enough to make their heads spin. They settled out of court within weeks. I didn't need the money, I wanted the message. That settlement funded the first big project, repaving the parking lot. This time with an engraved sign at the entrance. Private property by permission only. People still parked there. But now they did it knowing whose land they stood on. Word spread. Nearby communities called, asking how we'd done it. I told them the same thing every time. Don't fight noise with noise. Fight it with paperwork. For a while I thought that was the end of it. Then one morning I received an envelope with a return address I didn't recognize. Inside was a handwritten note in careful cursive. "I suppose you think you won, but the county still loves my donations." B.I. almost laughed. The letter smelled faintly of her perfume, sharp and artificial. She'd mailed it from 2 states away. My uncle said to ignore it, but instead I framed it. hung it above the cabin door as a reminder. Every tyrant writes their own confession eventually. The poetic part came later. A local news station ran a feature titled, HOA Scandal, President Under Investigation for Embezzlement. Turns out Brina's accounting creativity hadn't stopped with our neighborhood. In her new community down south, she'd started another association and repeated the same tricks. Someone recognized her name from our case files and tipped off the authorities. The footage showed her walking briskly out of a courthouse, sunglasses hiding her eyes as reporters shouted questions. The crawl at the bottom of the screen read, "Former HOA leader faces fraud charges." I didn't cheer. I didn't need to. The lake outside my window rippled with sunlight, calm and perfect, and that was enough. News of her downfall spread faster than gossip ever had. For weeks, people dropped by the cabin pretending they'd come to check on lake levels or ask about fishing permits, but I knew they wanted to talk about her. Everyone loves closure, especially when it comes wrapped in irony. I poured coffee, nodded through the stories, and said the same thing every time. It's over. Let's build something worth keeping. Still, I allowed myself one small indulgence. I took the settlement money and hired a stonemason from town to carve a plaque by the dock. It read, "Opal's Landing, Private Lake, Public Respect." The mason chuckled as he packed up his tools. "You sure about the wording?" he asked. I nodded. It wasn't a threat. It was a reminder that respect can't be demanded, only earned. The transformation of the neighborhood became a slow symphony of small victories. Families who'd hidden behind curtains started hosting barbecues again. The old veteran raised his flag without fear. The Kowalskis planted wildflowers where beige paint once ruled. On weekends, I heard laughter from the water instead of arguments about bylaws. But poetic justice has a way of lingering in quieter forms. One Saturday, a moving van arrived at the far end of the lake. New owners had bought Brina's house from the bank. Foreclosure, rumor said. They were a young couple, excited, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded there. As they unloaded boxes, the wife waved and shouted, "Beautiful neighborhood." I waved back and smiled. It is now. That evening I watched the sunset bleed gold across the water and thought about how easily power turns into poison when it's built on fear. The HOA had been a tiny kingdom of control, and like every kingdom, it collapsed under its own weight. 2 months later, the county assessor sent new property valuations. Everyone's taxes dropped slightly because the mandatory amenities had vanished. Yet their market values rose, proof that freedom is good for business. My uncle laughed when he read the figures. "Congratulations, Ezra," he said. "You turned bureaucracy into equity." We decided to celebrate the anniversary of that infamous meeting with an annual event called Freedom on the Lake, part cleanup day, part festival. No speeches, no politics, just food, music, and laughter. I invited the local news station that had once filmed Brina's accusations about me. The same reporter came, a little older, a little humbler. She asked if I had a statement. "Sure," I said. "Tell people to read their deeds. And to be kind, but not naive." That clip went mildly viral online. Nothing huge, just enough for strangers to comment things like "justice served" and "never mess with grandma's land." The attention brought tourism, which brought revenue, which funded more improvements. The dock was rebuilt wider. The shoreline gained a walking path. For the first time in decades, the lake became a destination. Sometimes I wondered if Brina saw any of it from wherever she'd ended up. I hoped she did, not out of cruelty, but because understanding what you destroyed is the truest punishment. On quiet mornings, I still walk the boundary line. The orange flags long replaced by small stone markers flush with the ground. Every step reminds me that ownership isn't about fences or papers, it's about stewardship. The land gives back what you put into it. One afternoon a storm rolled in fast, the kind that turns the lake to glass just before the wind hits. I sat on the porch, watching lightning stitch the horizon, and thought about how close I'd come to losing everything. All because someone mistook kindness for weakness. When the rain eased, I walked down to the dock. The plaque gleamed under the grey sky. I ran my fingers over the carved letters and felt a strange peace settle in. The lake didn't care about court filings or egos. It just reflected whatever stood above it. That night, as I closed the cabin door, I noticed the framed letter from Brenna still hanging on the wall. I smiled, took it down and fed it to the fire. The paper curled, the perfume burned away, and the flames flickered like laughter. Outside, thunder rumbled one last time before the storm moved on. I poured a glass of whiskey, raised it toward the darkened window and whispered, "Here's to you, Grandma. You won again.